In this tutorial, we'll build a Reddit ticker app that, as you can see all around me, runs on macOS, it runs on Android here and is mirrored over here, and it runs on iOS as is shown in the emulator here. It basically allows you to add a URL of a Reddit post and then watch it, including its scores over time as they go up and down. So it's a Flutter app, but all the logic is implemented in Rust using the RID library I created. And the app makes requests to the Reddit API, and that's implemented in Rust, right? Then it takes the data from those requests, the JSON, and deserializes it into structs, and that's also done in Rust. And then the app actually stores data about the posts in a SQLite database. So we can basically restart the app, right? So we can close this app, which I'm going to do now, and I'm going to restart it. And that basically storing in SQLite and kind of interfacing with that, that's also done in Rust. So pretty much all the logic is done in Rust. The Flutter part uses Cubit in order to communicate. And here we have the Rust app back up, and I'm going to put that back in its place. And we can see that the post data is still there, all the scores are still there. Now, the Flutter app uses Cubit to basically communicate to Rust. It basically gets the data from Rust to render it, and also it sends user actions to Rust, like if I want to add a post or something like that. And so what are we going to do in this tutorial? Well, first, we're going to build a quick Hello World app just to show how RID works. And in this Hello World app, we'll send data from Rust to Flutter. And then we'll explore the Reddit API. And namely, we'll see how we can make web requests to query for post information and then store it in Rust structs to then render it on Flutter. And we're going to use a urec library on the Rust end to make those requests. Then we'll implement the store to hold the data of those posts, including the scores. And we'll allow the user to start watching posts, which is initiated from Flutter and then delegated to Rust. And then finally, we'll have to basically query the score of those posts, right, regularly, which is done on a separate thread. So we show how to do that. And then we'll store that data in SQLite. So we show how to interface with the SQLite library and store this on the file system of whatever device we're on. So let's get started. As a starting point, we use an app generated by the RID scaffolding tool. And as always with Flutter, it's a counter app. So we can count here, except this one also counts by 10. And it demonstrates that everything is hooked up, as we can see on the right, that we are sending requests and we're getting messages back. But we're not going to do anything with this counter app. We're actually just going to remove all the code of it. So let's just do that first and get rid of the code over here in the Dart file. And we're going to go to the lib file as well, remove all the code, and we're going to start fresh. So what we're actually going to do is implement a simple Hello World app just to demonstrate how easy it is to get started with RID. In this case, we have a Hello World function here that takes an ID and returns a string, and the string is returned here, and we export that function to make it available on the Dart end. That's all we need to do that. And here we are basically using a RID feature that is allows us to log and send error messages and so on. We're going to get to that in a little more detail later on in this video. But basically we have log 1, log debug, and so on. And those messages are basically sent to Dart, and then we can print them on the Dart end. So let's actually do that. So what we're going to do is implement a simple main function. We're not going to even render a view yet. And I'm just going to paste this in. And as we can see right now, we're getting all these errors here because we are basically using things that are not of the current app. So we still have this counter app active. So if we run bindgen again, these errors should go away. As we can see, well, I'm not sure why this one didn't get away. Okay, so that's a little odd. But I'm sure this will actually compile. So let's just compile the app actually. So we basically have two steps, right? We generate the glue code, but then we also need to actually include these this new function in the binary. And so we just did that. Let me actually close and reopen to see if our errors will go away. and they showed. Okay, so now I can basically run this app and see the result. We should basically print hello world to the console, because that's what we do here, right? We basically call this exported function, and as we can see here, this is kind of using the lower level API of RID, which actually we don't use that much, but just to export a function directly, that's what we have to do. And then we convert that to a Dart string, the Rust string that we basically get back, and then we print that to the console. And at the same time, we were listening to the log messages over here on the message channel. And as we can see, that caused here this to print, right? So we can see here we printed this RID message, and here we printed the hello world that we got back from calling that method. Let's look at how we can get the data from Reddit that we need for our app. We basically will need the title of the post, the ID of the post, and we also will need to get the score of the post frequently. Here we have a post about RID from a few months ago, and what I actually noticed is that if we add XML to the URL, it will actually give us the XML data of the post. And if we add JSON, surprisingly enough, it will give us the JSON data. And I didn't find this quite by accident, because Reddit is not the only site that does it like that. But we can basically use it to our advantage. We can basically make a curl request in this case, just to try this out, and save it into a file. And I'm using here a user agent, and it can be anything, but Reddit wants a user agent. Otherwise, it gives us an out of request exception once in a while. So we have that there. And so now if we look at the curled page of this post, we can basically see what that looks like. And the most important thing is that we have a name, and that is basically the ID of the post. It also has already a score, right? So we could just keep making that same request and get the score that way. But as you can see, it's quite a large response. So probably not the best idea. Instead, what we can do, we can look at Reddit. There's basically the Reddit API documentation here. And what is basically very useful for us here is the info request. And we can pass it an ID, which is basically the ID of the post that we want to get scores for. And so that's a better solution. And let's actually look at what that looks like if we make that request. So let's do that here. And so this is the curl request for that. It's basically the same thing, except that we're going to a different URL, and we're using the ID that we found in the page response. Now, if we go in there and look at that, we're going to see that it is a lot smaller, right? It is like a tenth of the size. And it also has the score, which is the most important part in this case. And then if we basically want to see how we can traverse it, we can use JQ to figure that out. Obviously, by looking at the JSON itself, we can see how to do that, and we can make sure like that. So we basically have to go to data, get the first child and its data, and then the score. Now, how do we do this in Rust though? So in Rust, obviously we can't just traverse JSON directly. What we actually will do is we will convert the JSON response into structs, and then we will traverse the struct properties or the struct fields the same way that we did basically here. And how can we do that? Well, first of all, we need to somehow convert this JSON somehow to struct definitions, right? And there's a tool that we can use. So what we're going to do is I'm actually going to just copy this response, and we're going to go to a site that's called Transform Tools. And basically we're using the, there are a lot of options here, and we're using the Rust 30 option. And all we have to do is paste in the JSON that we just downloaded. And on the right side, it generates these structs for us, right? But as you saw, I actually don't need all of this data, right? We're basically just traversing and pulling out the score that we want. And so what we'll do actually is remove most of these fields that we don't need and end up with a really small structs that will lead us to the data we want. Let's actually add these structs we just generated to our app. So first of all, we're going to create a Redis module because there's going to be more than one file in there. So Reddit, and we're going to do mod rs, and we're going to include that in our main app. And if you go here, we're going to add a module with this particular name. In this case, we're going to have the Reddit page response, right? So that's what we want. So Reddit page response is the first one, right? And we're also going to say we want to use that everywhere. And let's create that module. And now if we, I basically just copy and paste the code in that I prepared for this. So basically this is the condensed down version of what the tool generated. And we can see that we basically get a root which has numerous pages, which I called Reddit page. And then we have children, and then we have the data on the children, and each child basically has that the data that we want, right? And in our case, it's going to be just one child that we're going to look at. Now, you can see that we are getting errors because we're missing deserialize and serialize. So what is that actually? Well, there is a crate called serde, and that basically generates code via macros that basically takes care of the serialization and the deserialization of these JSON responses, in our case, into structs. So we don't have to write all that boilerplate ourselves. And we're going to actually need an extra module for that, for the JSON part. But we'll get to that in a second. So let's just first generate the other response that we need, which is the Reddit API response. API response, and we're also going to use that. So we'll first create it and put our code in here. And in this case, we have the API root, and it has data as we looked at before. And it with children, each child has data again, and then we just pull out the score. Obviously, there are way more fields on there, but that's all we're interested in. And sometimes the tool that generates these puts different data types here. So I think in this case it was I64, but we're never going to have a score that used, so I changed it to I32. And then we're going to do the same thing that we did for the page. We're going to use all of this. And but now, right, we're still missing the serde crate. And we're also missing another one, actually. And I'm going to open that up right here. So we're going to have serde JSON as well. So let's see if that works like this. And so basically that one works together with serde in order to allow us to convert JSON responses or JSON data in general, not just responses, right? So we're going to have to add this with cargo. So let's do cargo add, and we're going to do serde and serde JSON. And serde by itself does not yet derive automatically. So we're going to actually have to change the entry of serde a little differently. We're going to have to actually include the feature we want. So what we can do here, we can change this to say the version is this, and we want the features. And these features are only turned on when you actually specify it, and that's to keep our compiled binary small, right? And the serde JSON crate can stay as is. So now we should be set up to actually serialize and deserialize our responses. So if we go back here now, we can see that we have no errors at this point. And yeah, we're good to go. Obviously, we still need a way to get our data. And so we're going to use another crate. For the first crate we're going to use is a crate to basically make client requests. And there are many crates that do that in Rust, but we wanted something fairly simple because all we have to do is really pull down JSON data, right? And so I settled on UREC for our purposes. It's very simple. You just basically specify URL you want to get, and you can set headers, and then you get down the body of the site. And in our case, obviously, we then have to parse out the JSON and convert that to Rust structs, but we'll look into that later. Then the other crate we're going to use is anyhow. And anyhow we use to normalize different result types into one result type. And it basically allows us to use the try operator or the question mark easier, right? Basically, we can just kind of like make all kind of API calls that may return an error result or not. And then we can just put a question mark after and kind of keep going like that. It makes that a lot easier. So let's go ahead and add those crates first. So cargo, add urec, and anyhow. So we just added those, but for urec actually, it doesn't come out of the box with JSON support. So it will just give us a string. It will not basically pull out the JSON, but we can basically add JSON support. It has that. We just have to add the feature. And we can see here that how we do that, right? Basically similarly to how we did this with Surdy. So let's go ahead and actually change this again here, right? Version equals, we kind of now know how to do that, features equals, and then we add JSON in here, right? And so now we are set up with our dependencies. Actually, this is not for Surdy. We need to add that support, or to Surdy JSON, we actually support that on urec. So let's do that actually. And put that here. And now this can stay very simple actually. And now we should be good. So this one is complaining for some reason. Features is JSON. Let's see cargo, check what it says. It seems actually fine. So now actually what we'll do is implement the request. And we put this into a Reddit file inside Reddit. This is where we're going to put all the Reddit related functions like getting page data or API data. So for now, we're going to put a page query here. And it's going to be for a particular URL that we want to pass. And it's going to, for now, actually be returning a result of nothing, because we'll just log the result for now, piece by piece. This is kind of how we can iterate over the different parts of getting the query. Now let's actually look at something here. When we basically get the want to basically share a link, right? What we're actually getting is a link with a bunch of query data here. So if we now add .json to this one, what we did previously does not work. We actually have to cut off the query from the URL. So if I do this, right? This is basically what we have to do. And so how can we do that? Well, we're going to match URL, and we're going to find the first occurrence of a question mark, right? And so then we're going to fill that in, match arms, right? So if we find a question mark, this one will be the index of the question mark. If we didn't find it, we're just going to say, well, we want to keep the URL, and we're going to reassign that actually to our URL. And so we keep the URL as is. Otherwise, what we're going to do, we're going to take a slice out of the URL up to the specific index. And obviously, we need to put the URL here. So up to the index where you find it, and not including the index itself, right? And so now it's complaining. So if you just put OK here now, we should be fine, right? OK, so, but we still don't have any page data yet at all. Let's see why it's complaining here. Oh, well, obviously, we need to import result from anyhow. So use anyhow, and we want the result. And now it should be happy. OK. Now, the next step, and actually what we're going to do is put the comment here, because no one will know what this does if we don't put it. Now, now what we need to do, actually, we need to append the URL part to the the JSON part to the URL, and we're also going to clean up the URL a little bit. We're going to remove any postfix slashes, right? So anything that matches right? We're going to trim the last slash basically, right? And then we finally have our URL ready to go. And now we're going to actually, let's do URAC. We're going to get a URL that we just prepared, right? And then when we basically do the request, we want to set the user agent for the same reasons that I mentioned before, that Reddit sometimes doesn't like requests without a user agent and gives us a out of requests response. And now we basically want to just call that. And the call returns a result. So we're going to put a question mark here. And so now we basically would have something. So we're going to get, let's just call that page response, right? But it's still like, it still wouldn't be a struct or anything. It would still be like some sort of response, which we don't know what it is. So what we actually want it to be, we want it to be a page root, right? So the page root is what we defined earlier by basically analyzing the JSON with the tool. And what we actually have to do in order to get there, we have to say into JSON, right? And so now our page response should actually be a page root, which is a vector of Reddit pages. So obviously that can also return results. So we actually need to put a question mark here. Now we got a page response. And all we're going to do for now is we're just going to log that out to the console, or basically sending this to Flutter to be logged. And we're going to use verbose debug logging here. And we're going to pass page response. And that's all we need to do. So we got the query page function ready. So now we just need to make sure that we call it from somewhere. And what we'll do, we just basically go back to our lib folder here, our lib module, and we just delete this function altogether. And we're going to add another one instead and call it fn page request. And we're not even going to pass anything. We're just basically going to say, we're going to give it a hard-coded string. Like, let's say we're going to do this one, right? Well, what happened here? Let's try to get this, this URL properly. And just pass it here. That's what we're going to use. And as we said, it will return a result, right? Obviously, right now it doesn't know that because we still need to import it. So let's just do this for now and get this imported. It doesn't know how to. Did we name it correctly? Query page. It's here. So we might want to use, yeah, we want to use Reddit query page. All right. And why is it complaining? Let's actually. Well, actually, I think we need to add. Oh, let's just do add everything like we did for the others. We just use everything. Okay, and now we should be able to go back here and get that in. Okay, there you go. So now we have that, but we are still getting a result back. So if I assign that, right, this is actually result. So we're going to say, well, we expect this to work, right? Should be able to get page or something like that, right? So we get at least like a useful error if it didn't. And then we can basically go ahead and well, for now we could just run that, or we could also well, this one will already log out, right? Remember, we're already logging this page. So actually, really all we have to do here is just run this like that, and then we're done. And why is it complaining here? It's complaining no query page in Reddit. It's right there. I'm not sure why it's not happy. Let's actually run cargo check. Maybe it will tell us a little more info. Actually, we just need to save all, I think. Okay, yeah, that fixed it, right? So we needed to save all. And now we basically are querying the page whenever this request comes in. Let's clean something up though. Here we can actually just use the super, right? We don't need to, because this is already part of Reddit. So now we have that. And all we have to do now is basically somehow call this from our Dart or Flutter, right? So let's first of all generate the bindgen file again. Generate all the glue code that Rid provides for us, and now we can go back here, and we should actually get well, it shouldn't be there anymore, right? Yep. So we should actually be needing to change something here. So what we actually need to do, we can see that this method is no longer there. So what we really want to do is we want to call Rid FFI, and we want to call a new function that we just created, and it is called export page request, right? Because it's getting exported, and that's all we need to actually really do here, and we should be able to run the app now. Well, obviously we still need to compile, right? So we generated the glue code after the update, but we did not yet generate the actual binary, right? We didn't recompile. So let's run this again and see what happens. So we're going to try to make the request at this point. So it's taking a little bit, but I already kind of can tell you what's going to happen. So this is not going to work yet, because it's actually, even though it's doing this from Rust, it's trying to make a client request. And we can see that the operation is not permitted. And we can even see where that is happening. So we can open up our lib file, and we can see that on line 6, and well, and it quit unexpectedly. And on line 6, actually, it's trying to make the request, right? So what's going on? Well, we have to give it permission to make client requests. So, and where is this done? Well, we have to go to the entitlements. And here we can already see that we have certain permissions here, but basically need to add this one in as well, the client one. And so let's do that. And there's another entitlement as well. Entitlement, let's see. And here we actually have, you know, permissions to server, but we don't have for client. So now if we save that and we run again, now it should actually just work. And we should be able to make our request and basically parse out our page from that JSON. All right, so now let's look at over here what we got. We have basically a Reddit page, and we have the data that we wanted in there. We have a bunch of other data that's not interesting to us. But yeah, we basically have our page fully here. And now we're ready to iterate on our Rust code to extract the post ID and then implement that query that actually gets a score repeatedly. But it would be kind of tedious to have to relaunch the Flutter app each time, right? So what we could actually do is like add like a main Rust function somewhere and kind of run that code directly. That would work. But you know, we also want to kind of see how it works together with written, if it works and so on. So what we can actually do instead, we can exercise our code from Dart, but not via Flutter, but just via like a Dart main function, right? So what do we have to do for that? Well, first of all, we have to actually go in here and change the build script a little bit. So, as you can see, it currently builds for a Flutter project only, right? And as you can see also, it has still some platform in there that we don't need. In this case, Linux, we don't need that in our case. So what we can actually do, we can make that project configurable. So let's take that out and make that into a variable first. All right, and then what we can do, we can actually make that configurable via an environment variable. So what we can actually do, so for now, let's get this to be happy, right? So now we got this, but now what we're actually going to do, we're going to put like a match in here, and we're going to match on the env var, and we're going to pass something like test start, right? If you want to do that, let's do that, and let's have it do the match arms here. Obviously, we want to import. We don't want to inline that. Okay, so we got that, and now what we're going to get here is well, we're not really interested in the kind of the value of that environment, but we just want to see if it's there. Okay, so we got that, and otherwise we're going to basically use that one, and we are going to remove the to do, and that should just work. Yeah. So basically now, if you pass test start, we're actually going to use the Dart project. Otherwise, we're going to use a Flutter project as previously, right? And now the other thing that we have to do now is, or just for convenience, is kind of create ourselves a quick script that allows us to use it. So right now we got bindgen, right? And bindgen just works like this. What we can do is we can just copy that to bindgen Dart and change just one little aspect of it, basically saying that we're setting the test start variable or environment variable to 1, and now it will be there, and it will basically build for Dart. So let's actually try that. Bindgen Dart, right? Let's see. So what should happen actually, since now we're building for Dart, it should actually generate a folder here. So it actually did, right? So we get that generate here. Otherwise, for Flutter, it always generates it inside the plugin folder, right? Okay, so now we got that, and what we actually now want to do is create a test file that basically contains the main function. So we don't need this one for now, and we're just going to add like something called vip.dart, meaning work in progress, right? So we're going to have a main function, and that's going to be async, and all it's going to do is actually going to call that function we just created, the export page, right? But readFFI is not really there, so we need to import that from somewhere, and we don't want to import it actually from here, from the plugin. We actually want to import it from here. So maybe we need to just go there so it'll pick it up. Yeah. So now we can actually say get it directly from the library folder, and now the function is here, and we can just exercise it directly, right? The problem is that right now we are not logging anything, right? And we could implement the same logging strategy that we had before, kind of handwrite it, but basically eventually RID will include some function that makes it like, it's a little bit more fuller featured, and actually makes it a little easier and kind of nicer. And for now, we actually just include that here. I created that previously. So we're just going to walk through this real quick. So as previously, for the log messages, we basically have a subscription, and we go to the RID message channel, right, to the stream, and we listen, like we did previously. Except now we ignore these messages, like error and severe messages, because we're going to handle them elsewhere. We're only going to care about log messages, warn, info, and debug. And basically all we do here is we change the prefix. So this is a Rust icon. This will going to let us know that this is coming from Rust. And this will make a lot more sense once we actually see it in action. And then we just have a different icon to say, like, this is a warning message, info, or debug message, right? And then well, here's some cleanup code and some instantiation code. Not too crazy here. Now, for the error handler, we have a slightly different one. We basically ignore all the log messages, and we handle all the error messages. And we put an error prefix in front of it. And in this case, there might be some details. That's the main difference, right? So we have message details that we handle here. And as we can see, they are nullable, so they're not always there. But for the error, they will most likely be there. For the log message, we just basically going to have the main message. So we don't have details there. And that's pretty much all there is. And we just basically initialize them all with the init method, right? And so now if we go back to our work in progress, we can now basically call that and basically say that we want to initialize this kind of, all these handlers of error messages and log messages. So we're going to say read messaging dot init. And the thing is, obviously, we have to import this from logging. Here you go. So now we get this. And basically now if we just want to make sure we rebuild, but we shouldn't actually have to. Yeah, we don't have to because it's the same binary, just using it from Dart directly instead of from Flutter. So what we actually can do now is just Dart test and Dart. And now we should actually get the same thing. So we can see now we got a log message here, right? And we can see that we get this little Rust icon and the debug icon, and it says got page. And so you can see how much quicker that was. Instead of starting up a Flutter app all the time, this is much faster, and we're going to use that going forward. And some of you might actually be wondering, why did we need why did we need to even specify this, like Flutter was a start? Well, Flutter is obviously somewhat different than Dart, already where we put the generated code, like I showed. But also there are some things that are included when we create a Flutter project for convenience with Red, that are not included for Dart because they are not, available in plain Dart. So that's why we basically have to, in this case, if we want to run it directly with Dart, we have to specify that project type. So now we can use this main script that we wrote in order to quickly iterate. One might actually convert that later on to a test, but for our purposes, we won't. And actually what we're going to do, we're just going to compile our binary because we're going to keep changing it. We don't have to run bindgen again because we will not change the API. Then we'll just basically execute our script. And then we'll pipe through a tool that I wrote at some point that basically just makes a JSON look a little nicer. So let's do that. And we can see all the data we're getting. Definitely we're getting way too much data, and now we're going to iterate and instruct that data piece by piece, right? So let's go back to our Reddit file where we have the query page. So right now we basically have the entire page response. And what we actually want to do is, like, first of all, extract the data, right? So I think we remember something. It was .data, right? Then we had to get the children, and we had to get the first one, and then that data, and then we had to get I think that's where all the title and ID and all the stuff was there, right? So that's basically what we're trying to do, right? So first of all, let's get the data. So we take our page response, right, from that we have above here. We take that page response, and we get the first page out of it. Now the first page, right, could be is an option. So it could be, we could unwrap it, but that's not clean, especially we don't want to error somewhere in Rust and then crash our app, right? So instead what we'll do is actually we convert this into a result. So we use this function OK or else, and then we'll basically use anyhow to convert this into a proper error. So we're going to say anyhow, and we're going to say the page response did not contain any pages, right? That's obviously not expected, but well, it could happen. So we have to import anyhow. All right. So now we are getting this, and basically what we can do now, we can then put a question mark here, right? In case that fails, it will basically return immediately a error result, right? And then we get the data out of this, right? So we get the first page, we get the data of the first page, and then we get the children of that one, right? And again, we want to get the first child, and it's kind of so similar that we're going to copy and paste this. We want to get the first child, but then again, it could be not there, and then we can say that the first page, we can say the page did not contain any children, right? So that's obviously also something we wouldn't expect, but it could happen. And then finally, we get the data out of that. All right. So now we got the data that we wanted. And so what we're going to do now, all we do is we change this log message here to log that data instead. And we run again. So basically, let's just test if this worked. And yes, we got the page child data. right? And it has the name, the title, and the URL. And you kind of can already see like, okay, what we need to do next. We need to now extract the title and all these things out of it. Let's start with the ID because that is the easiest. So data.name, that's actually the ID, and we have to clone it. Why do we have to clone it? Well, because data itself is a reference, right? And so we can't just, if we want to return it, right, we want to return it as a page info kind of object or a struct. So we have to clone it. So let's do the title next. The title is a little trickier because it is an option, right? So if you look at that, it's actually an option of a string. So the title could be there or it could not. So we have to say that we do the same thing that we did before. So we're going to do the OKOL. So I'm just going to copy that actually. And we're going to say that the page was missing a title, right? Page was missing a title because actually we do want the title, right? And then again, we clone it in order to be able to return it later. So we got that, and now we do pretty much the same thing for the URL. So we got data dot URL as ref, right? And then we basically copy this part here, and we're going to say the page was missing a URL. And at this point now, we can basically print out what we have so far. So we can say we get the ID, we get the title, and we got the URL, right? So ID, title, and URL. Okay. And now let's run this again and let's see if this works, right? So we get the ID, we get the title, and we get the URL. So great. But again, now we're just still logging it out. We're not even like returning it yet. So what we actually have to introduce is a page struct that we'll just use to store exactly that data that we need, right? No more, no less. So let's make this a little nicer. And what we're going to do, we're going to go actually to our Reddit main module, and we are going to introduce the Reddit page struct. So Reddit page, and it's going to be struct page, and it's going to have an ID, a title, and a URL. And we're going to just derive debug in case we want it, and also clone just because we'll need it later. We don't actually need to make this a written model because we are not going to send that page directly as is ever to Dart, right, or to Flutter, because I mean we're not going to look at the page. We're just going to look at the post and the scores, right? So now let's actually go back to where we were, and let's now actually change the value to be a page, right? That we're going to return. Let's import that, and then we can still log here, but we're going to return a page ID, title, URL, right? And now in the page request, what we'll actually just do is we assign that page and log there. So actually we don't need this log here anymore, right? What we actually will do is here in the page request, we're going to say that page equals the query page, right? And then we can just say read log info, right? And as I said, it works exactly like print on or format. So we can just basically use this weird symbol that says that we want to debug the page in detail, and we just log that, and then we're good. And do we have to actually recompile? We do have to recompile, and we can just run it as is. We don't need a CDL thing in the end anymore, but it makes it look a little nicer. So if we don't put the cardinal, basically it's a formatter for JavaScript in JSON, and it figures out that this is almost JSON, so it can format it like this. So basically now we got ourselves exactly the data pulled out of the page that we need, and we can now go on and work on the request to get the post score. So now in a similar way that we extracted the post from a page response, we are now going to extract the score from a post response. So what we're going to do is create a new function, query score, and it's going to take the ID of the post, and it's going to return the score, right? But since things could go wrong, it's going to be result, and it's going to return that. Now, what we also will need is the URL that to go to ask for the info about that score from that post, right? And we already we just posted it, right? We already talked about that earlier about the Reddit API that we're going to use. We're going to use the info route of the API. And so that's going to be our base. And so we're going to build our URL from that. So let's just put this all together with the format. We're going to take the base, and then the query string is going to be the ID of the post we are getting the score for. So let's do that, info URL, and then the post ID. And then the next part is actually so similar that we basically can copy paste it into here. So we're going to get, instead of a page response, we're going to get a API response, or we could call it whatever we want. And it's, instead of a page route, it's going to be an API route, right? And so let's get that in. And now that's basically how that works, right? The into JSON call here knows what to deserialize to because we gave it the type here, right? Now the next part is actually also very, very similar. So we're going to get the first of the children of the data part. So we're going to do let score equals, so we get the API response, then the data, and we're going to get the children of that, and get the first one, and then it's going to be the same idea again if we're expecting one, right? We're expecting to get one. So if not, we're going to say that the post info was missing a score, right? Or was missing children. Let's just be more specific. And so we got that, and from there we're going to get the data property and the score property, right? And I spelled that wrong. That's why I was missing any code assist here. Okay, so and then we basically have to return that score. Now, obviously we need to be able to call that somehow. And so we're going to go back to our main file, and we're going to export another method here. And let's call it fn post score request. And it's going to take the ID of the post and going to return the i32. And so what we're going to do is get the score from with the function we just created, query score, and pass the ID. And in this case, we're going to expect that it just worked. Obviously, that's not what we're going to do, you know, for the app itself, because we're going to actually send error messages to Dart if we found if we basically encountered them. So should have gotten score, but for now this is fine. And so then we return the score, right? Now one thing we still need is how can we get the ID, right? Okay, so once reference to it. How can we get the ID? Well, we need to actually return this from the page request, right? So here we're going to change this method to return a string, and then we're going to say page.id. That's the ID of the post. Okay, so let's run bindgen dart again. right? And now we can go and in our working part here, we can say final ID equals, we can await the post ID. And then we can say, well, the score is so now we should have another, so it doesn't pick it up for some reason. We have to jump here for a second to refresh it. Oh, there it is actually. And pass in the ID. And then we're going to just print the score to the console. Okay, so that should actually work. And we're also going to have, obviously, to recompile the binary because we added things. And then we can just basically run this and see if it works. And we got, so this is interesting, right? We get the score, when we print this before we actually print the log message, that's because this works over an isolate, right? Kind of asynchronously, this log message. So here we're subscribing, right? It's a stream that we're basically listening to, right? In both cases. And so that doesn't necessarily happen synchronously. So that's why the log message actually comes after we print the result, even though we are kind of logging before even returning the page ID, right? But that's not an issue. So now that we got the Reddit interaction worked out, we can actually forget about it for a little bit and focus instead on the models and basically on our store that we're using to render the UI, right? So let's start by working out the pieces. And we're going to actually add this to our Reddit module here. And we're going to start with the score. So a score doesn't just have a score, right? It's a struct actually because it has a little more inside of it. So obviously it does have a score, right? But at the same time, we need to know the timestamp of the score, right? And we could store the absolute timestamp kind of in Unix epoch seconds or whatever, but it makes actually more sense to store the timestamp in relation to when this the post was added, basically when we started watching the post, like how did it change since then, right? So we're actually going to have sec since post added and at that. And so that's basically all we need for the score. And now we're going to do the post itself, right? And so the post has a bunch of things. One of them is the ID, which is a string, and it has a bunch of strings actually. Oops. It has a title, and it also has URL. And finally, it has scores, right? So, and that's going to be a vector of score, right? Okay, so now we got the basics worked out here. Obviously, we also need when was the post added, right? So, and this we actually will store in system time, which is a structure to store timestamps properly. So a little different than on the score. Now we need to expose them to Dart. So we're going to make this a written model. And we're going to also derive debug, just in case we want to, we want to debug it, right? We want to print it. So now for the post, it's a little different. First of all, we can see here that RIT doesn't know how to convert system time to Dart because it doesn't know what this is. We could try to figure out a way, but we actually don't need this on the Dart side at all. So what we actually would like to do is skip that. Like we don't want to include that when we send the data to Dart. So what we actually can do is we can add another derive here, and you can say we want to be able to configure this something in the struct, like the fields. And once we do that, we actually get another attribute that we can use, rid, and we can say rid skip. Kind of similar to, if you're familiar with Surly, they also have this kind of attribute where you can skip things that you don't want to serialize or deserialize. So now, if you don't have this here, this attribute doesn't exist, and we'd actually, well, I'll show that in a second once we fix the other thing on the bottom. So here the score is a struct, and rid doesn't know that, so we'll have to tell it. So we're just going to put rid structs. And I explained this in other videos, why rid doesn't know that this is a score. Even right above it says it's a struct, right? It doesn't know it's a struct. That's because this attribute only sees a struct. It doesn't see anything else. So we need to basically help it out a little bit and let it know. So now if I were to remove this one here, we can see that it's complaining that this doesn't exist. So this only exists if we actually derive config. That's why we have that here. And now we're basically ready to create our store, right? But the store we're going to create in the main file. And actually we're going to remove all of this because we don't need it for now. And let's just go ahead and do that. So it's going to be store. And it's going, for now, it's going to have posts, which we are basically storing in a hash map, and the key is going to be the ID of the post, right? Okay, that's our store. And now, obviously, okay, so we need to import. Okay, so we just created the store, but it doesn't seem to want to find it. The post, sorry. The post, it doesn't, okay, so there's, oh, we're not including it yet. We're not including it, oh, because we just removed that, yeah. Okay, so we removed a little bit too much. There you go. Now it should know what a post is if we just import it. Let's see, there you go. And the hash map, we also need to import. And okay, so now we're pretty much ready, except that this is not really a rid store yet, right? We need to actually make that one. So rid store is a special model because it's the kind of the entry point to all our application data. Now we have the same issue as before. We just need to say that the post is a struct, so it can know that. And so now we are good, except it's complaining now there's no create on the store. Okay, so well, first of all, we need to define a little more things. So we're gonna have a message, right? And we're gonna get to that in a second. And now we can basically go ahead and implement the rid store for, let's see, okay, for our store. Okay, and so this is basically helps us, this trait helps us to figure out what we need to put here. Oh, we forgot to put the message that the store will basically work with. And then we can implement the missing members, and now we can see actually what we need to implement here, right? So we need to have a way to create the store, and then we have a way to update the store. Okay, that's all good. And now we can actually work on the create method. And just to be able to render something at this point, we are actually going to just create some fake post for now. So just to see that everything works, right? So we're going to create some fake post, add it to our posts, and see if we render that correctly. So let's create a post ID. Some fake post, and then we're going to create our post. And we added it now. No. And we just take this ID. We're going to have to clone the ID because we're also going to need it to add it to the hash map itself. Title, my first fake Reddit post. And URL, we're going to put something. something made up. Fake.reddit.post or com post one, something like that. Okay, so now we have a valid post. Obviously, we need to put this one here, and now we're just basically going to add that to our posts, and we're going to create posts, it's kind of, you can't one line creating a hash map easily, so we're just going to do like this: hash map new. Then we're going to add the post ID post, and then we're going to return that. And finally, we're going to return the store busy posts. Okay, so there is some error here. We're missing an equals. Okay, let's see what it's complaining. Oh, well, okay, so we basically, instead of putting this, we just want to put that. What are we missing? Added ID title URL. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, okay. All right, so now we should be better. So it's still complaining, missing scores. Okay, so scores, we're just going to put nothing for now. Okay, cool. So we got a fake post. We added to the store, and we're pretty much good to go. So what we're going to do first, we're going to remove this one here. This one is the that we generate for tests. We don't need that for now in order to avoid confusing ourselves. And also, we are actually going to run bindgen and not bindgen darts this time, because we want to actually render this in Flutter. And so what we also want to do, we get all these warnings here, if you noticed, up here, right? So that's because we're not using everything yet. And most of this comes actually from the Reddit module. So what we can do for now, we can put a little program here that avoids all these warnings. So we're going to allow unused variables and that code for now, right? Because we're not using a lot of this in here yet. Okay, so we got that. And actually, yeah, light for a second. Let's actually try this again in Dart first to just see that this works. We're still getting some warnings, but we're not going to worry about that now. Okay, and we also need to rebuild. So, and at this point, we should be able to access a store from here. So we can see that these methods, right, don't exist anymore because we removed them. So what we can say, the store is the store instance, right? Instance. Okay, so we should have that. Why? Oh, because we. Oh no. Did I do bindgen dart? Maybe I didn't yet. Let's see if it catches up. And then we should be able to just basically print the posts of the store. So let's actually try that. I'm gonna hope that it works. Let's see. Let's run this. And it worked, right? It's just the Vim just didn't catch up yet. But we can see here we got our fake post sent to us to Dart, right? So that worked altogether. And that's basically, we're creating something in Rust, the whole struct, and we're sending it to Dart and printing it. And now we're ready to integrate this all into the actual app. And we're going to, again, remove this one because we don't need it at this point, basically the Dart version of the generated code. And before we get started, though, I want to take a second and explain a little bit about RID error handling. So let's actually jump to a, just like somewhere Rust, and create a function just so I can explain stuff. So it's called explain. All right. So these are basically the macros that Rit provides for us to interact with Dart with regards to logging and error handling. So the log messages are warn, info, and debug, at least for now. And they work pretty much like println or format. So you pass a string, and it can have like this interpolation symbol here, and then basically whatever you pass as arguments after that, you can pass as many as you want, right? But then obviously you need to have another interpolation, and then that gets basically built into a string. So as you can see that all these log messages send one string exactly, right? One message. The errors are a little different. So we got error and severe, and they basically send two parts. One is the message that you want to show to the user. So in here, we can describe a quick message, what happened, and then here we can include the details as the second argument. So the difference between error and severe is basically that error is meant to be something went wrong, but the app is still fine and it's probably not that critical, and we just maybe want to alert the user to it. The severe error is something really went wrong, and something may not even be working properly right now, and we want to alert the user and probably force the user to acknowledge that happened in that case. That's the main difference. And so now how do we handle this in the Dart side? Well, on the Dart side, we're actually free to handle this however we want. Let me actually just remove all this. But there is an example that I prepared. So we can just basically add rid, and we call it messaging. And that's basically going to be the module where we're going to handle that. And I'm not going to type this out because it's a lot of code, but I'm going to go through this. We already saw this a little bit when we wrote this for the tests. But the main difference here is that the log message handler basically has well, the log message handler is pretty much the same, but the error handler has a little extra to it, where if we have a build context passed to us, which means like we know how to render a scaffold material banner, right? We actually show that. And so in the case of severe, we show a material banner, which means that it pops up on the top of the screen and the user actually has to acknowledge and dismiss it, right? It doesn't go away by itself. However, in the error case, as I said, this is not quite as bad. We are just going to show a snack bar, right? We're going to show a snack bar here, and then it just disappears by itself. And then here we basically provide just a way to set that context, right? Whenever we kind of are building the widget and we finally have a context, we pass it here so that we can show snack bar and the material banner. And that's pretty much all there is to this code. It's a lot, but it's not quite as complicated as it seems. And again, you're just basically listening to the stream, and you could write your own version of this. I'm thinking of at some point including a default one with Rit just to make all this a little more convenient. Now what we're going to do is just set up our app skeleton and also install the dApps that we need. So we're going to use Flutter, Bloc, basically Cubit, part of that. And so first of all, we need to add these two dependencies, Bloc and Flutter Bloc. So let's do that. And then we need some assets. So basically, we're going to show some nice little images in the right. So instead of like copying that all over, I have been just linking this from the other examples that we have here. So let's do that. And then we need to also include them in the pubspec folder. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say assets and assets. So we have the dash, which is the Flutter one, and then we have the little Ferris, the little Rust icon. So we set up there, and then we're going to go back to actually our main Dart here, which we haven't visited in a while, and we're going to start setting things up. So first of all, we have now a Rit messaging implementation, right? So we can actually use that instead of manually implementing the logging. So we're going to init that, and obviously we're going to have to import it. So let's do that. And then we're going to have to also, so one thing we want to do is we want to avoid rendering too many messages about locking the store locking that kind of clutters things up, especially since we're going to be kind of refreshing the scores all the time, kind of in a regular interval. And then we are ready to run the app, but we don't have an app yet. So let's actually implement that. So we're going to have a stateless widget, and it's going to be the red ticker app. And I'm not actually going to write all this out by hand because it's just boilerplate that's very repetitive and very, very similar in pretty much all the Flutter apps. So I'm just going to copy that in. And we can see here we need a Reddit ticker page next. We can see we're just setting up the theme. I'm wrapping everything in a material app. So let's do the Reddit ticker app next, the page. Reddit ticker page. And actually this one needs to be stateful. So let's do that. All right, so now we got that. And again, a lot of boilerplate here. We're actually going to need a title. And then let me actually just copy and paste, and I'll just explain as I go. So we have a title here, right? And we pass it into the constructor. Up here we do that. And then we create the state. And then the build method is actually very boilerplatey. So I'll just put that in here because I have that all prepared in order so we don't have to sit through me coding this up. So we have a safe area, scaffold, app bar, right? We have app bar here. And then we have, in the app bar, we show our little assets. And the main thing here is that we have a body which shows the to-do view, the post view, which we have to do still. And that's pretty much the most important part. And I'm actually going to run this now so we can get started early on this because it will take a while. Make sure we get everything saved. And then what I'm going to talk about now is the probably only a really different part here is we're going to init state, and we need to supply something to our messaging in here. So obviously we need to call super here, and we're going to also provide the build context to the error handler. Like I said before, for the error handler, we got our app started now. It's not showing anything, and it's actually for some reason complaining. So this one we can ignore. This one is just something that Flutter does for whatever reason. It's complaining about that since recently, but it's not a real problem. What I wanted to actually do is provide the context, right? So we provide the context here. Again, this is so the error handler can show a snack, a material banner or a snack bar, and for that it needs the context, right? So I'm pretty sure I know now what we are missing up here. We are not running the app, right? So we need to actually run the ticker app, and now things should just work. So let's try to run this again, and we should just start up fine now. There you go. So we got our beautiful little mascots here, and we can see to-do post view, and that's what we're going to do next.